So without further ado, let me introduce our wonderful panel. We have Dr. Erin Castro, who is co-director and co-founder of the University of Utah Prison Education Project, and also an assistant professor of higher education in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy at the University of Utah. We also have Alesha Seroczynski, who is the Director of College Operations, Moreau College Initiative at the Holy Cross College of the University of Notre Dame. We also have Heather Erwin, who is the Director of the University of Iowa Liberal Arts Behind Bars Project and the Senior Advisor to the Institute for Higher Education Policy. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Castro.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Wow, that was sad. Morning. How are we doing? Welcome. I'm actually not going to talk for very long today. One of the things that I really appreciated yesterday was the dialogue and the questions, and so I have a pretty bare bones PowerPoint, and I'm just going to kind of walk through some things. I do want to thank everyone who put this conference together. It is no small feat to put a conference together, and so the work that you've put in shows. Those of us kind of located in the West sometimes feel a bit left out of kind of what's happening in New York and California. And so I think this might be the start of something really great. So thank you. We have a whole crew from the University of Utah who's here. We're excited to be here. I'm thrilled to be on a panel, both with Alesha and Heather as well. I had the honor, the pleasure of visiting Holy Cross last year, I think, and meeting some of your fantastic students. And hoping to do so with Heather in Iowa soon. So I want to do 4 things this morning. First, I want to talk a little bit about the Research Collaborative for Higher Education in Prison and what we do, and most importantly, why we do it. Then I want to share a little bit of what we've learned over the last 3 years of doing research on the field of higher education in prison. My presentation today isn't a report out so much of the research. Instead, what it is really a reflection of what the last 3 years has been like in attempting to research higher education in prison, and more specifically what our team refers to as prison university engagements. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then finally, I want to end with a description of what's next. Where we're headed as a collaborative, but as well as to provide some reflections related to the kind of research that I think the field, but more specifically what I think our students need as we're moving forward. So first, I am not in presenter view, so I feel really kind of out of my element here. Oh, perfect, okay. Let me say that I'm a scholar of higher education. Specifically, I'm a social scientist. I'm trained in educational research, assessment, and theory, and so I come at the study of higher education in prison as the study of higher education. And I think this is really important to mention because it provides insight into the mission of the work that we do with the collaborative, but it also underscores the work that we do with our on-site programming in Draper. The state of Utah has 2 state prisons. We are located in one. We provide on-site programming to individuals housed in a women's unit and individuals housed in a men's unit. So what is the collaborative? The Research Collaborative on Higher Education in Prison is a dynamic team of researchers working with a number of you in this room. If you've not yet heard from our team and you run a program or work with a program, you will be hearing from us soon. We're interested in what prison university engagements look like. And there are so many things. I mean, I think just anyone kind of listening in yesterday, there are so many things to study. But what we're really interested in here are 2 issues. We're interested in equity, who has access during incarceration, and quality. What specifically do they have access to? And we're coming at this as, again, people who study colleges and universities. And so we're not simply just counting the numbers of colleges or the numbers of universities or the numbers of prisons who have programs. We're trying to document exactly what those opportunities are. who they're afforded to, when and under what circumstances. And those are very nuanced questions, you know? So if you've been on the phone with me, you know, and I'm asking, I can almost sound a bit annoying, right? Because I'm asking very specific questions. Do you have the course number of that course? The instructor, does that instructor teach that same course on campus? Did you hire that instructor from the facility, right? And those questions, I get it, can feel a bit like, wait, why are you asking me this? And I'm hoping today to kind of demonstrate a little bit about why we're asking those questions, because currently, at this moment right now, we are not capturing students who are incarcerated through federal data collection mechanisms, and that's a big problem. So why are we doing this? Well, one of the reasons we're doing this is we want to try to better understand how prisons and universities are engaging with one another so that we can assist in developing theory and really accountability, holding colleges and universities accountable. So one of our goals as the collaborative is to compel colleges and universities to fulfill and really enhance their missions by extending their reach into prisons, jails, and detention centers, and at the same time, make it easier and, in fact, actively recruit folks with prior criminal histories and folks who have been directly impacted by incarceration to come to campus, not making it more difficult, not, we just had a conversation about adding the prior criminal history question at my university. These are all things that make it more difficult for people to pursue and complete educational pathways. And I don't have to preach to the choir, and I will not get into it. It does not make campuses safer when we ask this question. So in essence, we want to hold colleges and universities accountable, and we want to be a resource. We want to help them do this work well. And so that's kind of one of the ways that we approach this work. So 4 years ago, I began asking these kinds of questions about the field of higher education, both as a scholar, but as someone trying to start a comprehensive college and prison program at the University of Utah. And frustration does not begin to explain the feelings that I had when I was trying to have campus conversations in 2015, and there were no asset-based, credible research and literature for me to turn to. We launched the collaborative in an effort to both challenge the dearth of quality and reliable research available to us, many of us working in programs, and ultimately to change the current landscape. I think yesterday, kind of talking about issues of quality, we'll talk about quality on this panel today. And then personally, I also, as a practitioner as well, just had a deep desire to work alongside folks running programs. So yes, we want to improve quality, and yes, we want to improve research, but most importantly, we want to improve the quality of research coming out of this field to ultimately serve this field. So much of the research from which we pull is not coming from fields of education. So they're coming out of fields such as criminology, sociology, psychology, penology, biology, medicine, etc. And it's not that interdisciplinarity is a bad thing. Quite the contrary. Much of what was discussed yesterday was collaboration. And we know that tackling some of the most stubborn social challenges is going to require a multidisciplinary approach. So please hear me very clearly. It's not that folks doing research outside of the field of higher education or the field of higher education in prison is a bad thing. But when we're using those paradigms to inform the work that we do in education, that raises some serious questions about what it is that we do as a field. So part of what we want to do at the collaborative is to make sure that higher education has a seat at the table, that we are there, that we are part of these conversations, and that we are actively contributing to the credible research necessary. Yesterday there was a brief conversation about learning outcomes. I'd love to have a longer conversation about learning outcomes. We need to be at the table and to be part of those conversations, and that's really what we want to do at the collaborative. So what do we do exactly? And I shared a little bit about why we do it. One of the biggest challenges that we currently face in the field is that we cannot, with a great degree of confidence, answer basic questions. Mary talked a little bit about this yesterday, around issues of access, participation, and completion. So right now we cannot answer who is participating in college during incarceration, how many people are participating, what shared characteristics do they have, what shared characteristics do the facilities that are allowing these colleges and universities to come in have, what do students have access to during and after enrollment, what do students actually think about their college experience and the access that they have. And what do students want once they're done finished or kind of finished with programming, whether they're in prison or out of prison? Any college or university in the US can provide both broad and specific information about each incoming cohort of students. Descriptive information required at admissions applications, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list. Course taking patterns, grades, GPAs, how many courses students enroll in per semester, time to degree or departure from the institution, financial aid awards, grants, and scholarships, health records, and increasingly, post-graduation information such as self-reported perceived value of the degree, civic participation post-degree, employment, starting salary, etc. Those of you who work in colleges and universities, this should sound as familiar discourse. Your IR offices can pull this information up readily. In the academic field of higher education, we can also answer questions in the aggregate about cohorts on a national level. So we know, for example, much descriptive information about total undergraduate enrollments in the US. Does anybody have an idea from 2016 of how many undergraduates first time, so this would exclude transfer students, enrolled in colleges and universities across the US? Anybody just want to take a guess? I'm a professor, so I can wait. At least 10, correct, yes. We're more upwards of the 10 millions. We're about 20 million students enrolling first time at a college or university in the US. Do we have any idea of how many students are currently enrolled who are incarcerated? Pardon? More than that, but not much more. Our estimates, we're still well under 250,000 at this point, right? So 250,000, right? Which is, I mean, if we just kind of think about that, and we also kind of throw into the mix here the fact of who is eligible. If you approach the field like we do, anyone is capable of going to college. It's simply a matter of providing them the tools to become ready, right? So we already know that there's a huge information gap in that regard. So we know this information about total undergraduate enrollments, for example, because colleges and universities are required by federal law to report it if they receive Title IV funding, right? And Title IV funding is how students receive federal financial aid. All of the second chance Pell sites right now have essentially rewritten the contract with the Department of Education. They are Title IV funded schools. And it's also how Title IV schools are able to receive competitive grants, right? So as a faculty member, I'm able to apply to an NSF grant, right, as long as my institution remains accredited and in the certain ways that the federal government requires. We know that there are over 4,000 Title IV funded schools in the US. I'm going to come back here. And to date, according to our team, and this is last year's data, so I know this number will increase, we have about 230 institutions of higher education that are affiliated with in-prison higher education. And I use the term affiliated pretty purposely here. This includes credit, non-credit. This might include lecture series at this point, right? This encapsulates a lot of the diversity of higher education. The federal government, specifically the National Center for Education Statistics, the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, right? They collect these metrics so that we as researchers can answer some basic questions like the ones above that I mentioned. So it's not happening perfectly. Those of you who follow kind of federal data reporting mechanisms know that there are a lot of gaps and there are a lot of improvements to be made. But it does provide some baseline information for us to ask better questions, ultimately toward improving student experiences. And so what is known in the literature as high impact educational practices, many of you might be familiar with the National Survey of Student Engagement. It's disseminated at almost every institution across the US every year to try to capture how students self-report. Did they engage with high impact educational experiences during their time on campus? And I'm going to actually end my talk with a few comments on that. And so as a collaborative, why do we do this? Well, as a growing field, We cannot yet answer these questions, and so we're limited in our ability for growth. And as a result, we place our students in prison at greater risk for subpar educational experiences. This also means that we know little about the actual on-site experience of incarcerated college students, and this worries me. I'm certain it worries all of you in this room. But any Google search right now on college student experience would pull up a number of empirical, refereed research articles of high quality. We just simply don't have that research right now for our students in prison for a host of reasons, which we can get into certainly in the Q&A. And so what kind of information do we collect? Well, one of the first things that we need to do, Mary talked a little yesterday about kind of definitional categories. We're doing a lot of conceptual work at the collaborative right now. So much of what we know about the quote-unquote impact of education in prison kind of lumps together all educational treatment programming, and it's very difficult for us to disaggregate and kind of disentangle. There's actually a wonderful article called Disentangling the Effects of Post-Secondary Education in Prison. We actually tried to do that. And so one of the first things that we did conceptually as a research collaborative was, what is it that we mean when we say higher education in prison? And we're not reinventing the wheel here. We turned to the National Center for Education Statistics, and we're using their definition. It's formal instruction provided to students who have earned or are concurrently earning a GED, high school diploma, or equivalent secondary credential. It includes programs whose purpose is academic, vocational, and continuing professional education. And it excludes avocational, adult basic ed, adult secondary instruction, and other formal programming efforts not affiliated with an institution of higher education. So notice there's nothing on here about credit or non-credit programming, right? That's not something that distinguishes higher education or not. But the biggest thing that what we're finding, the biggest thing that would exclude programs from our current list of 230 is that it does not include an admissions requirement. And I think Mary's language yesterday about being agnostic, it's kind of where we're at. We're kind of agnostic about that. But we are very much committed to making very clear definitions of what higher education means, because we do that for students on the outside. If you're not incarcerated, we know exactly what kind of curriculum you're getting. If you're in the state of Utah, if you tell me you're in 9th grade. If you tell me you're in 10th grade, I also know the curriculum that you're getting, depending on the state that you're in. Right? And so it is important for us to be able to tell, okay, is this post-secondary? Is this secondary? Is this at a lower division undergraduate level? Is this at the upper division undergraduate level? Are we talking about graduate education? And so that's some of the conceptual work that we're doing. So what else do? We are currently reaching out to colleges and universities involved within prison education to talk about admissions requirements. Do you have one? If so, what are they? Does the prison also additionally require admissions requirements? And I can tell you by and large, the answer is yes. For almost every program that we talk to, there are an additional layer of requirements that the prison or the facility requires. What coursework are programs offering? Do they actually have degree numbers? Are they the same courses that are provided on campus? Are they new courses? What completion pathways are made available? So this would include certificates, licensure, associate's degrees, applied associate's degrees of transfer for the California folks, bachelor's, master's, and unfortunately, no one yet outside of correspondence kind of that we're aware of doing PhDs. We're also really interested in modes of engagement. So how specifically are students learning in the classroom? And we've counted thus far at least 8 different ways that colleges and universities are engaging with prisons. And this ranges from sending a non-incarcerated instructor inside to the classroom to teach incarcerated students. It could range from a non-incarcerated instructor coming in with non-incarcerated TAs and students into the prison classroom. It could be incarcerated students teaching themselves. It could be broadcast. It could be a hybrid. We have examples of Canvas being used and then in-person instruction. It's a lot of different ways. And rather than us trying to say it's either this or that, we're really trying to create the boxes so that we can better understand what might be referred to as a typology of engagement. How do universities do this work with prisons? And ultimately, again, how are students experiencing this? We're also interested in when incarcerated people are able to earn credentials. In some states, it is against the law to confer a degree to an incarcerated person. And so while they can enroll during incarceration, they can't actually earn that degree until post-incarceration. In some states where it is not law, that is still the practice. And so we're curious as to why that's the case. Is that a political issue? Are there particular corrections requirements that make that a challenge? And then we're also interested in collecting supplemental and enrichment opportunities. Do students have access to a library? Do they have access to tutoring sessions? Gosh, there are so many cool things that programs are doing that we hadn't even thought of. And we kind of just ask, what are the things that your students are doing? And then we're collecting this information and adding it into our database. And so as a collaborative, we do not conduct research on incarcerated people. And I think this is really important for us to mention, right? We're not kind of going in and interviewing students and doing pre and post tests. That is not what we do. We take a macro view of the field, and then we kind of drill down in ways to examine structures, pathways that are specifically made available. And so for those of you who are in attendance at NCHEP last year, you noticed that I showed kind of a big road, kind of a pathway. That is exactly what we talk about in the literature. So if we can get folks onto a particular kind of curriculum pathway, what does that pathway look like once they're in prison? And are there ways for me to go off that pathway? Am I able to do another one? Do I have to stay on this one? How do I get on it? Those are the kinds of questions we're interested in asking. So what have we learned? First of all, we learned that there are too few regionally accredited colleges and universities providing on-site quality instruction in prisons, jails, juvenile facilities, and detention centers. So again, let me just reiterate, these are last year's data. I know that there are more than 230 institutions that are in our sample right now. But we know that less than 6% are engaged in this work, and this is a bit of what the institutional type breakdown looks like. Overwhelmingly, public two-year universities are the ones doing this work, over almost 60%. And this is a wonderful thing. If you know any of the kind of literature on community colleges, this is really, really important. We then have private four-year institutions at just over 22%. Public four-year institutions at 19%, I'm hoping to see that grow. The for-profit sector, I'm going to tell you right now, is underrepresented in our data. It is very difficult for us to get our hands around what for-profit institutions are doing inside prisons. And anyone who works inside of a prison knows that they're there. And so we are trying to think creatively of how we can better capture the work that they're doing. And then private two-year institutions, this is a second chance Pell site. So on one hand, this is a wonderful opportunity for the work to invite colleges and universities into this work and giving them the tools. I think the report that Jody mentioned yesterday and some of the work that Heather's going to talk about, providing them the tools to do this work well, I think we're at a great opportunity to do that. But I also think the opportunity is urgent, and that when we embark on this together, we should always keep in mind that ultimately it's the experiences that the experiences that students inside want, and the experiences that they deserve. The other thing that we know is that most of the colleges and universities that are involved are two-year colleges. And while this is a good thing, this is really important, by and large, two-year institutions are underfunded. And so it's really, really important that in addition to the 2 years kind of doing this work, that 4 years come in as well to provide that pathway and not simply rely on two-year schools to do the work, because they're also doing the work of serving the most diverse populations of students throughout the US, incarcerated or not. We also know that most programs are not currently collecting information and data in systematic and consistent ways about their programs. And this is not because programs don't want to. It is a capacity issue. I think it's a capacity and it's also a knowledge issue. We were just talking earlier. Most folks who are running programs, with few exceptions where you have paid executive director positions, are doing this in addition to their full-time job. We're kind of like stealing time. I know this is being broadcast, but all of us are kind of stealing time from other positions that we're doing. I know at the University of Utah, nobody is getting paid right now to get this program up and off the ground, and I'm seeing some heads. Like, this is a common thing. While it's good to kind of get things started, it is not a sustainable model, and without accurate data and assessment around the impact of our programs, it's going to be very difficult for us to expand to the institutionalization that we need to be secure and to ultimately grow. The other thing we've learned is that it is extremely difficult to find correct contact information for the majority of prison university engagements. So much of what we do is we do online searches, and then we do cold calls to prisons and to universities. And when we can't find that any information online, we're typically rerouted a number of times. And what that tells me is that the program is not institutionalized yet, right? It doesn't have a home somewhere. You know, I think it's interesting when we kind of look at the program here, it's coming from the gender studies website. Am I correct? Yeah, so that signals that the division or Department of Gender Studies has kind of made it a priority to kind of put this program on their website. And so when we can't find this information, it also signals to us that there might be some confusion about kind of exactly where this program lives, who's in charge. I can't tell you how many times we get respondents back that say, I'm not sure who you should talk to. Let us figure out, let us try to find someone, you know, and the person who we're talking to is a VP for enrollment management and maybe heard of the program last year and can provide us a bit of information. The other thing that we've learned, and then I'm going to wrap up, is that integrated pathways are largely unavailable to incarcerated people. The vast majority of prison university engagements right now do not meet the criteria of higher education. They are the facilitation of GED programming and adult education. Again, I keep going back to Mary's comment about being agnostic about this. It's just a fact. But what it does tell us is that, you know, when less than 6% of all institutions who could be doing this work in higher education aren't, one of the questions we need to ask is why. And can programs that are already doing the wonderful GED work and basic education work build upon the work that they're doing to increase those pathways? So let me just kind of end here with a question that we return to a lot as a collaborative. What kind of higher education do incarcerated people deserve? And one of the comments yesterday, which I thought was an excellent question from someone in the audience, was, you know, many of us are coming from different perspectives here, and we're not all going to agree on things. And so when we talk about quality, you know, your vision of quality might be different than my vision of quality. And that's absolutely true, right? Like, some of us might come at this because we believe that education is a fundamental human right that should not be denied. Some of us come at this, a student of mine on campus, right, comes at this and says, no, education is for me to get a job. And if it's not going to help me get a job, then it's not worth my time. And these are all common discourses, right, that influence how we think about higher education in prison. But what I want to say is that because incarcerated college students are not afforded choice, like non-incarcerated college students are, right? College choice. Because they're not afforded choice, because they're not given kind of a list of institutions from which to choose and a list of degree programs from which to enroll, it's really imperative that for those of us who are not incarcerated and are able to kind of do this work, to make sure that what is being provided is of high quality. And I'm not going to get into the Pell Grant conversation because I know my colleagues are going to take us there. But we teach a book in our program called Why School by Mike Rose, and he has this quote, essentially asking us, you know, after we criticize everything and after we kind of tear everything down in education, what will we put in its place? Can we actually imagine what it is that we want? And so part of what I hope the work of the collaborative is doing is to helping us kind of imagine, or for some of us, reimagine or unlearn what we think it is incarcerated college students deserve. And if it's anything less than what we think we deserve or our own children deserve, then I think we have some kind of fundamental questions with which to wrestle. Thanks. I'm happy, we're a pretty active team. This is a list of some of the stuff that's under review and in press right now. And then if you want to find us online, we're on Twitter, and that's our website, and that's my email, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Erin, we're looking over to Alesha and Heather.
All right, good morning. Is it still morning? Sort of.
It is.
Yes, oh, it's still 9:11. Good morning.
Morning.
So I think Erin teed this up nicely, and this will be, I think, relatively brief in hopes of, again, spurring conversation and questions and discussion. I'm going to speak specifically about a project that the Institute for Higher Education Policy is engaged in with support from Ascendium regarding the development of key performance indicators in college and prison programming. So this is speaking directly to the issue of quality. How do we measure quality? Or how do we determine what quality programs look like? I'm going to give you just a quick landscape of the history of support for higher ed in prison. And this is just a nice walkthrough, right? Higher Ed Act. I don't know if we've heard the Higher Ed Act is potentially under reauthorization currently, all the way through the '94 crime bill, which was responsible for removing Pell Grant eligibility for incarcerated students. Second Chance Pell program is cited on here, 2016. This actually, the Real Act reintroduction has rolled to 2019. It should be reintroduced in the coming weeks, actually. So this is a history of federal support, right? A small snapshot of how programs are being supported, but one important way in the current landscape. So the project that IHEP is working on for Great Lakes, which is now called Ascendium, is around specifically prior research and metrics developed by IHEP around figuring out what quality looks like in higher ed overall. So this was Gates Foundation work to create a metric framework across the broader field, and specifically looking at benchmark success and identifying ways to improve on that success. So what we wanted to do was take advantage, like Mary and Erin have pointed out previously, that we know how to do higher ed, right? So this is how do we do higher ed in prison based on those metrics, but also recognizing that there are challenges to offering those accommodations, and that's not the right word, but to offering programming that meets those metrics in a carceral setting. So this all began with IHEP's report called Toward Convergence, which was a document whose goal was to frame the quality conversation around higher ed generally. Oh, you're not going to be able to see any of that. So, but what this represents are the primary metrics that we wanted to capture, which are performance, as Erin indicated also. Performance, we're looking at success, we're looking at efficiency, we're looking at equity, we're looking at the way students access higher ed, the progression that they engage in, their completion rates, how much it costs, including affordability, and then post-college outcomes. So this is, right, we're swimming in the same pool here. This is something we're all interested in. For the key performance indicators, specifically for college and prison programs, we're looking at three different, we're calling them buckets, right? So the first one is performance. We want to look at student access, progress, completion, cost, post-college outcomes. These are across the board for higher ed generally, not specific to college and prison. But we want to see how they're applied to college and prison programs and related efforts. The second one is efficiency. How do resources impact college completion? And this speaks specifically to Erin's points around the fact that we don't have access to a lot of the same resources, but we can, and we can make efforts to make sure that we are requiring that. So bucket three, equity. Our goals across the board are to make sure all students are included. Everybody who's eligible can participate, regardless of whether they can afford it, including developmental assistance to get them ready to participate meaningfully and to succeed in the classroom. And recognizing too, and this is part of IHEP's work around inclusion, that there are populations that are underserved and that might be invisible in other data collection tools. So this is additionally also an effort to fill in some of those gaps in measures. So there's going to be a lot of words on these next slides. and I will try not to just read them to you. And I think that this is also a conversation that we can continue to have at NCHEP. In November last year in Indianapolis, we convened the advisory council and just talked about what does this look like. And we'll get further into it as I go through, but recognizing that a lot of voices need to be heard here, and wanting to err on the side of inclusion as opposed to just trying to, find the perfect fit, and recognizing that we're going to have to work backward a little bit. So part of the project includes creating a landscape scan of higher ed programs, and we will most certainly work in collaboration and have been working in collaboration with AHEP, with the work that Erin's doing at the collaborative, to just look at what the field looks like, right? And to be able to draw on the work of other educators and researchers to determine what we might be missing. The next priority is to talk with people, right? What are practitioners doing? What are students, both currently and formerly incarcerated, what have they found to be the most helpful pieces of their college programs, and figuring out what the most useful measures are to determine the effectiveness. The outcome that we're looking for is to design a set of key performance indicators that can be applied across the board as one tool, right? One tool in the toolkit that educators and universities will have to be able to talk about what this could look like, and to kind of create a framework that can be drawn from and customized. I love Mary's use of agnostic, right? Something that can provide a framework, just a basic guideline, and then you can go through and say, well, we need this, we don't need this, or this applies to us, this doesn't apply to us, or I can tweak this in a way that will be beneficial to my students. We have begun field testing. Sort of the tool for gathering data is, it's really an elaborate Excel spreadsheet. So we're putting a lot of information together. Actually, Alesha's program at Holy Cross and my program at Iowa are going to be the guinea pigs, where we're going to figure out if we are able, honestly, to collect all the information and put it in a usable format that provides us with meaningful information. And then we'll be able to compare. So my program is relatively new. Alesha's been doing this for 7 years. We've been in my facility at the Medical and Classification Center for about 1.5 years now. So the next step then, we have assembled an advisory board that does represent lots of different ways to consider post-secondary, as Erin referenced. Under that umbrella, all of those different ways of providing access. So we're looking at schools that provide vocational and career tech and BAs and some graduate, not very much, and figuring out what those practitioners look at and what they want to, what's best to inform their, what they are continuing to strategize, I suppose. And we want to look at varying perspectives that can help us kind of get more on a common playing field. I think that's one of the things we talk about a lot in the tension between corrections and higher ed is, and not that higher ed is not siloed, but corrections by and of itself is very siloed and fragmented. And a lot of times, like Erin was describing, people in higher ed and I think that's a product of being in facilities. Not everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And in DOCs in particular, you have people operating in very distinguished veins, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. And I guess that happens across the board, but it feels like it's exacerbated when we are putting then educators into that mix and asking them to be part of a Department of Corrections program. So that's a very perspectives piece. So the last step is then to share these key performance indicators across the field to help practitioners gauge the effectiveness of their programs. So the idea is, here's what we came up with, right? We talked to a bunch of people. We think that these are good ways these are good tools to draw from that have been effective in the field of higher ed generally, and here's how we want to be able to apply them to college and prison, also recognizing that we are going to have to customize them, and that college and prison differs in some ways from campus-based higher ed, and how do we make sure that we're still looking to provide high quality in a different setting. Oh, and I'm done. Sorry, no. So I guess that's
Mic drop.
Yeah, exactly. So I look forward to your questions. I think we're in the middle. I mean, that's actually an appropriate way to end it, because we are in the middle of this process, and it's going to take participation on a lot of different levels. It's so wonderful to be here in Wyoming and to know that these kinds of programs are emerging. You know, every month, it seems like every couple of years, as Erin indicated, that last year's data, it's not current. So we're updating the field. People are getting excited about this work, and it is important to make sure that we can have a way to talk about it, even if it's just like, here's a foundation. Let's start here, and then we can climb onto the tree together. I'm looking now, as going back to Erin's first research slide. So I'm going to pass it on to Alesha, who will talk specifically about her program at Holy Cross, and then I hope we'll have time for questions at the end. Thank you. Oh, I just lost you.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm excited to share our program that is a collaboration between Holy Cross College, the University of Notre Dame, and we are also a Bard Prison Initiative Consortium school. Before I begin, I would like to introduce the college to you. So I have a very short film, but I believe that it introduces both our faculty and our students very well. I will say that it is unapologetically Catholic. And it was actually designed as a recruiting tool for faculty at the university. And so with that understanding, whoops. Let's see if we can get it to work. It did work a second ago.
When I became incarcerated, things were very bleak and very dismal, and I really didn't know what I was going to do.
We all know that there's a problem in the country with incarcerated individuals who have their lives stalled, have difficulty finding employment afterwards, falling back into patterns of criminal activity. But what we hoped was that we would give the students an opportunity to find a different path.
His son should have been a king. So Leontes takes on that role and heals Cecilia.
Yes. I decided to start teaching at Westville when the program started. Everything about the space and their experience of that space is tightly controlled. And so to be willing to enter into not only the idea of themselves as college students, but to participate in the transformation of that correctional space into a university space requires a lot on their part. And I've been amazed at how capable they are at entering into the ways of thinking and the ways of being that accompany a liberal arts education.
This is a transformative process in around such a thirst for knowledge. And I have never been in an environment like this before. We're in the business of trying to transform the world, one life at a time, one dream at a time. No one is expendable. Everyone is intricately tied to each other in a kind of web of life. The professors here are great. They do not slack and teach us differently than they do on campus. So they expect that type of quality of work from us as they do on campus. They have this energy about them that really intensifies when they talk about what they love, and it's a passion that they have, and we see that.
You know, I think oftentimes people think of teaching as one direction kind of exchange of information. When in actual fact, if the relationship is a good and productive one, you learn more than you teach. If anything, sometimes we have to bargain with them to keep up with them because they're working so hard. They're excited to be able to have one with them else. Where you then have the ability to go out and translate those talents. It's deeply gratifying to see someone go on, get his degree, move beyond the prison, and now be employed.
It just opened up a lot of doors that I never told myself before. Not only did they get a lot of them there, but they followed up with things about the world, and they tried to provide me with opportunities to either spread the word or in a better position as I continue down my path. My dream is at this point to become an addictions counselor and to influence positively in the life of people. Everything that I've experienced feels like God's calling me to do this, like you've been through it, and I've got 6 years sobriety now, so I've got that time under my belt, and I can show people that it can be done. I couldn't say thank you enough. I could say it for the rest of my life, and it wouldn't be enough.
My hopes and dreams for these students are remarkably similar to the students that I teach in Notre Dame. And that's they get the kind of deep and rigorous education that we offer, that they are able to use knowledge, that way of thinking, to understand themselves in the world in a meaningful way.
The cross was the most insidious form of abuse there was at the time. And what Jesus did was to give us hope forever, because he turned that into an instrument of salvation and of love. And they know the cross. Those guys know the cross. There is no doubt about that. And that's what we do there, is the part that turns that cross for love into an instrument of hope. And that would be a wonderful thing for us in this program. It changed my life. So when I get my diploma and I walk across that stage, the first thing that I'm going to yell is, if I can do this, you can do this, there is hope. When you put the time into something, if you put a lot of time into it, you can mold that to be something very special. And that diploma, I don't want to cry. That diploma is going to be not the end of my education here, but the catalyst for much bigger things in the future. And I don't know what they are, but I know that I can tackle them.
Holy Cross College was the only campus in the state of Indiana to win the Second Chance Pell Award in 2016 for its program at Westville Correctional Facility. We were excited for the income that this award would generate to improve and expand the college, but quickly realized that Second Chance Pell was not going to be the windfall that we had expected. Instead of hiring the assistant director and other support staff we desperately needed, that is I, was forced to rely on one AmeriCorps volunteer and one part-time graduate student to support the college at Westville. In our first Second Chance Pell class, only 19 of 53 students, or 36%, were Pell eligible. We were crestfallen. The reality of Second Chance Pell did not match the promise. We have made modest gains over the past 2 years and now enjoy just over 50% Pell eligibility. Of those who are not Pell eligible, most have a default student loan, 11% never register for selective service, 5% need parental signatures, which is a nightmare to try to gather, and 7% have other issues that restrict enrollment, such as drug charges while enrolled in college before they were incarcerated. This year, just 3% were selected for verification, which is an all-time low for us, and I suspect many other institutions as well. Verification is simply yet another form that our students must complete to show or verify that they actually make nothing. Honestly, this is a process that baffles me. The form seems to be created by Holy Cross College, so it is unique to each institution. I understand from the former Director of Financial Aid that the Department of Education selects those who need verification, but we keep the form on file in case of an audit. As the parent of 2 college-age sons, I can tell you that the verification process is significantly more complicated when you must produce prior W-2s and other forms of documentation. So imagine being incarcerated and you have to produce a prior W-2 if you were not incarcerated 2 years ago. I mean, and so if they can't do that, then they're not Pell eligible, even though they may actually have a W-2 somewhere, but who knows where. %43 of our current students have some college credit, with just over half of those having earned credits while incarcerated. About 10 students enrolled in college on the outside, and sadly, 100% of those men have defaulted on student loans. We actually have 2 additional students with default loans who did not even complete 1 semester, so their loans seem to have been for nothing. I'm not even going to get into the whole for-profit sector and default student loans. While many of the 65 second chance Pell sites limit enrollment to Pell eligible students so that these men who are in default would not be eligible, we have been able to provide full scholarships for all of our students. Institutional support from Notre Dame and Holy Cross College, as well as funding through workforce development with the Indiana Department of Corrections, large and small private foundation grants and individual support enable us to enroll all students who gain admission. In contrast, I have heard other second chance Pell sites speak openly about accepting only students who are Pell eligible. This past fall at a national conference for colleges and universities who do this work, one site director confessed that it is, quote, and I heard this out of his mouth, especially heartbreaking to pull a student from classes in the middle of the semester once they learn that he is no longer Pell eligible. I just want you to imagine for a moment what this must feel like for an incarcerated college student. Would we ever consider doing that to a traditional college student? According to the Vera Institute, just 3 second chance Pell sites have conferred BAs this past year. So 1 in 4 BAs granted this year were at Westville through Holy Cross College, or 6 out of the 23 total, which kind of blows my mind because we've only been doing this work 7 years, and I've only been at this position for 5. So in just 5 years, literally, we've conferred 25% of the incarcerated college baccalaureate degrees, a number that we expect to grow despite the maze of DOC time cut calculations and all other kinds of Pell regulations which our students engage. As a member of the Bard Prison Initiative Consortium, colleges and universities, we follow the BPI model of admissions that includes both a University of Chicago essay-style prompt and interviews with 2 members of our faculty steering committee. So our students might actually be interviewed by Steve and Kate, for example. They have conducted interviews together. We do not exclude on the basis of mathematical ability, but we do a math placement assessment during the first week of classes and offer developmental math and tutoring if necessary. Our acceptance rate is about 20%. We have had anywhere from 80 to 150 men apply in any given year. Outside of writing and speaking ability, admissions is limited only by EPRD, right, or earliest possible release date. We require at least 3 years, but no more than 10 years to apply. As a sidebar, the IDOC has other behavioral restrictions, which we don't even know about, and they apply before the men can sit for admissions. As with most college and prison programs, finding the perfect pool of applicants is always challenging. When we felt that we had kind of plateaued at Westville Correctional Facility, we added another facility 90 minutes away. Recent changes to sentencing in Indiana have limited our applicant pool at Miami Correctional Facility. So this year we are adding 2 more correctional facilities 3 hours away in Indianapolis. And actually I'm going there in 2 weeks to do informational sessions. This will add to our spring and summer workload as we require a minimum of 3 site visits to complete admissions. We have an informational session, then we go back and anyone who wants to sits for the admissions essay. And remember, again, you just have to have 3 years because we want you to be able to complete the associate's degree. And then we go back and conduct interviews, and then we admit a final class. Holy Cross College is committed to the model, however, because it works. Since 2001, the Barred Prison Initiative has educated over 800 students and conferred almost 450 degrees. Among its graduates, only 4% have returned to prison. We have educated over 150 students since 2013. We will confer our 50th associate's degree and our 10th bachelor's degree this May and August. MCI graduates have become very successful returning citizens, and our recidivism is low. Only 1 associate graduate has returned to the Department of Corrections, although we do have a handful in county jails across the state for parole violations, a classification of recidivism that haunts programs like ours, and something we could talk about on a little sidebar. The RAND report in 2013, as well as others more recent independent research, suggests recidivism rates in other college programs might be slightly higher, but in general, 20% of associate's degrees graduates return to prison, and in one small study, 100% of BA graduates did not recidivate. So in this small study, no one who earned a bachelor's degree returned to prison. Although institutional support for the program has remained consistently high since inception, implementation of the Second Chance Pell has proven cumbersome and sometimes prohibitive due to the need to interface with new and different departments across campus, including but not limited to admissions, financial aid, the business office. I had an excellent working relationship with the registrar, and the provost is my immediate supervisor, but I had never even set foot in the financial aid office before we received Second Chance Pell. Recent sweeping administrative changes at Holy Cross College have brought better working relationships among these diverse departments, but new personnel mean that we often re-educate the same topics annually. New personnel also means new forms, new protocol, new procedures, new measures. This constant reinventing of the wheel can be exhausting and leave our Moreau College staff feeling frustrated and really drowning in details. For example, and although this is tangentially related to Second Chance Pell, we are on our 3rd protocol in 5 years for matriculating Moreau College students from Westville to the main campus. We have yet to have 1 Moreau College student join us on the main campus, although Holy Cross is very supportive of that and would like to have a Moreau College student join us. And we hope to have our first student this August. Moreau College students comprise 10% of the Holy Cross student body, and they regularly appear on the Holy Cross College honor roll at that rate of 10%. 5 of the 6 baccalaureate degrees we conferred this past May were given with honors. 3 students have been inducted into Delta Epsilon Sigma, the National Catholic Honor Society, an honor granted only to the top 10% of their class. Our most recent site visit from the Higher Learning Commission was very successful, I'm happy to report, and we received full accreditation as an additional location of Holy Cross College. Being a Second Chance Pell recipient has allowed for a more robust educational experience and enriched growth of the college at Westville. Holy Cross College has been able to engage many colleagues and centers at the University of Notre Dame to invest in the Moreau College in many ways. In many ways, MCI has been on the cutting edge of campus development for Holy Cross College, and students involved at Westville have an arguably better education than their counterparts on the main campus. For example, recent developments in the Holy Cross College core curriculum brought the campus closer in alignment to the Moreau College core we developed 5 years ago. As you saw, our faculty are renowned Notre Dame professors, intrepid Notre Dame graduate students, and the best faculty of Holy Cross College. Students are given new perspectives and new opportunities through college-like clubs, including but not limited to gardening, writing their own newspaper, guest lectures, a baseball game, culinary arts or cooking exercises. They operate their own writing center, and they do their own math tutoring. We will offer at least 36 classes this year in subjects such as art, art history, philosophy, theology, English literature, political science, labor history, economics, anthropology, business, mathematics, chemistry, physics, biology, botany, sociology, Greek, and Spanish, as well as our introductory and interdisciplinary Great Books courses in the humanities that all first-year students take. At this point, we have a Emeriti faculty who are amazed by the other tenured and retired faculty that we are able to recruit across campuses, and we have also had 2 faculty from the University of Chicago join us this last year. And finally, all of our baccalaureate students complete remote internships, a creative new model that enables our students to gain real-world experience at the end of their college careers and just before they return to their communities. Unfortunately, Second Chance Pell cannot sustain the college alone, and pending expiration of Second Chance Pell restricts the full potential of the college. Fortunately, there is growing bipartisan support for reinstating Second Chance Pell for all incarcerated college students, which would mean that the Moreau College could provide educational opportunities at Westville indefinitely. Thank you.
Alesha. So we'll go ahead and open it up for questions, and I'll just sort of circulate. Who would like to go first?
Thank you very much. I have a question specifically on the MCI and your relationship with Bard College and the wider consortium. My name is Ben Walker. I'm from University in East Anglia, and I've been in contact with Dan Karpowitz for the last year. He's been very helpful.
Excellent.
So I'd really like to hear your experience working as part of that consortium.
Sure.
And what influence BPI's methodologies had upon your own work. And then secondly, just a side question. The 10-year limit on the...
Sure, let me answer that one first, and then we might have to go to lunch to talk about BPI, but I'll give you the brief history. So the 10-year limit, that is really DOC imposed because Westville Correctional Facility is basically 6 months to 10 years. So it's a level 2 facility in the state of Indiana. And if you're familiar with Northern Indiana, you might, those of you who are, you would know that we have a level 4 facility, including the death row actually in Michigan City. And then we have a level 2 facility in Westville. And they're actually equidistant from the university. So when we started the program, we really had to choose between the level 2 and the level 4. And choosing the level 2 was really Bard's model, that we are educating men and Bard, of course, women who will be able to get out at some point after they earn their degree. We had actually a professor emeritus in the program of liberal studies whose area of expertise is history and philosophy of science, Phil Sloan, who advocated very strongly for Michigan City for the level 4. He had been volunteering on death row, and he saw the value of educating, men there who would never get out. And much like Damon last night, we are all very supportive. I mean, philosophically, we all agree that that higher ed is valuable. It's it has intrinsic value, right? I think all of us who have PhDs, we know that at a very deep level, right? You don't go get a PhD because you're going to get paid a lot of money at the end of the day. You go get a PhD because you love a discipline. And, but we also had limited resources, which kind of gets to the BARD question. And so we had to choose. And choosing enabled us to educate, you know, men like James, who look forward to going home this year and is probably going to finish his education at Marion or Butler, two other great institutions around Indianapolis, and is very interested in graduate work in public health. And we expect that he'll be able to do that and that we can support that, you know. So really the decision was both the level at the DOC and also institutional resources we had to choose. So the shortest long answer of BPI and Notre Dame. When Max Karpowitz and Daniel started, of course, Max started BPI as an undergraduate and added Daniel very soon because Daniel was basically a trailing spouse, right? And a lot of people don't realize that in the state of Indiana, Indiana had the largest college and prison program in the nation. Every state school was in every penitentiary across the state. So Ball State, IU, Purdue, all of them. Indiana State, you name it, and John Nally, many of you know that name, was running this program. And so Max and Daniel came to Indiana to consult with John because he basically had the largest national reputation for managing college and prison programs. Now, of course, BARD is a private school. John was running state school programs. But John was able to keep the Indiana program going over 15 years after Pell funding was cut in '94. And I'm just gonna, is this being recorded? Yes. So Indiana experienced a change of guard in the state legislature around 2010 and passed laws that actually make it illegal, and this is something Erin referred to, for state funds to be used to pay for state college programs. That's very specific. Okay, so state funds cannot be used to support state schools in prison. Okay, so if you think that through, Ball State, IU, Purdue, they could no longer educate. They did not have state funding. And of course, they had no Pell funding. So basically, they had no funding. And so the last transcript that we have from the old state system is 2011. So about the time that Indiana was decimating its state college program in all of its correctional facilities, BPI won a chunk of change to go across the country. And of course, Max and Daniel had this excellent working relationship with John Nally that was 15 years old. And they came back to John and said, hey, what do you think? Let's start this back up. And John said, sure. So that's very unique in the state of Indiana, that especially in the consortium, that BPI had the DOC before it had the college or university. Usually you have the college, like you guys do here, you wanted to do something. Notre Dame wasn't necessarily thinking, let's start a college and prison program. But Max and Daniel came, well, this, as it goes, John said, like, who are you thinking? And they said, well, we were thinking Notre Dame. And of course, John said, okay, let's see that happen. And those of you who've worked in higher ed long, you can imagine, right? A place like Notre Dame putting its name behind a program like this, it was a big deal. But Max and Daniel were extremely persistent and just continued to write letters and knock on doors, use all of their connections to finally get someone in the administration to call a focus group. And Steve Fallon was, actually I attended, several of us across the campus and community attended that first focus group, and from the get-go, we were just sold on the model. Primarily because it's the same kind of model that Steve and Kate and everyone who's involved in this work offers at Holy Cross and Notre Dame, right? So it's exactly what we're doing. It is providing the best possible college education, not the worst possible college education, but the best to those who need it the most. And so Steve and a handful of other senior faculty just started a grassroots movement and just made it happen. And we've just built it from the ground up.
I just had a couple of questions. First, just quickly to clarify, so Notre Dame is awarding the degree?
Yeah. They're Holy Cross College degrees.
Okay.
Holy Cross and Notre Dame and St. Mary's are all in the Holy Cross order. And so when in that initial focus group, Jay Capnero in the Office of Community Relations was a person who called that focus group, and he invited Holy Cross to the table because he knew that, first of all, Holy Cross has an associate's degree on the book. And it's possible that Notre Dame has an associate's degree left over from very, very old post-World War II, era, but it certainly hasn't been used in decades, and it may not even exist anymore. And so because the associate's degree, as you all know, is a very important first step, and Holy Cross had the associate's degree on the book, and they have a status of guest student, and also really more mission driven towards providing an education to underserved populations than necessarily Notre Dame does. And quite honestly, just how this was all going to work in a big institution like Notre Dame, as opposed to a small college like Holy Cross, where I can call anybody up in a heartbeat and manage any type of red tape that might come up. And so that's why I think for all those reasons, Notre Dame brought Holy Cross into the conversation. And so the credits, now the students no longer have guest status. That was something that was early on when it was, very, very pilot. Is this going to work? We're just going to make them guest students. They take a semester or two. We'll see how it goes. Obviously we're well beyond that now, but they are immediately in the associate degree program. And then either as they near or when they complete their associate's degrees, then they apply to the baccalaureate program if they are staying and want to earn a bachelor's degree.
And that stays with Holy Name?
It's all Holy Cross.
Holy Cross. Okay. The one other question that I had, though, was, and I guess it's kind of a question for everyone, but you mentioned that you look forward to or hope for the reinstatement, the full reinstatement of Pell for all students. And it strikes me that you give a really fantastic overview of the catastrophic flaws of this initiative. And I mean, I think like a more comprehensive one than I've ever seen anybody do in a public setting.
Thank you.
And it's interesting to me that you close with, and therefore what we need is more Pell, which would seem to me to just scale the catastrophe, unless I'm missing something.
It's possible.
But one thing I just wanted to mention was when you mentioned that there's a lot of support for reinstatement of Pell for everyone. I've had a couple of conversations with folks advocating for Pell who've implied, and I don't think this is necessarily what you were saying, but who've suggested that there might be a way to tweak Pell. So in other words, if it comes back for prisoners, that we could do something that would make it, that would clear all these barriers that are currently plaguing the prison programs. And it just seems to me politically that would be impossible. Because the idea of an incarcerated person who never registered for the Selective Service getting a pass when the non-incarcerated, I'm not saying at all you're saying this, but kind of for the record, for the group, the idea that wouldn't happen for the non-incarcerated student, but we would somehow make it happen politically for the person inside, never, ever will happen. And so anyway, so I just wanted to get you to talk about that, but also it seems to me another conversation we all could be having would be alternative forms of federal financial aid, if we're going to go the federal route, that are not Pell. And so I wondered, really for all of you, if you have thoughts or ideas about, like, it just strikes me that the conversation about federal funding has been kind of reduced to Pell for reasons that don't necessarily make sense.
Yeah. I agree with your second assessment, and I don't think that it's fair for us to eliminate, say, selective service requirements for incarcerated college students without, doing so on the outside. And it is a nightmare. I mean, it's a nightmare. It's extremely time consuming. On the other hand, if we lost our second chance Pell funding, I would immediately lose anywhere from $150,000 to $175,000 at this size. And the DOC wants me to double in size. And so I would have to come up with this year $150,000 just this year.
But just to push back, is that an argument so $100,000, which thousands of foundations and private individuals could write you a check for tomorrow, is that an argument in favor of continuing to advocate for a strategy that will exclude so many currently incarcerated people?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by the last statement. So second chance Pell.
Given what you highlighted, how so many people are ineligible.
But are we talking
Pell.
about only relying on Pell, or?
I think that's Jody's question. It's
the students, so many people are ineligible only if you're only accepting second chance Pell students, and we do not. So from our perspective, we're not eliminating anyone. If they gain admission, they have a full ride. I know what you're saying. Because
I think also because part of our problem is the people leading the discussion are working with institutions that have a lot of integrity. That's not
exactly.
Those are not the characteristics that will be typical of schools that enter the field when Pell comes.
Well, we already have, and we know, even though we're not saying, we have some schools in the second chance Pell, and I mentioned one of them, who don't operate with integrity and are not providing full scholarships, and are. I mean, it's really just greed. I mean, there's no other way to say it.
From the policy perspective, that will be the norm. With the number of schools that continue to accept students or who start.
I think that's debatable. I mean, I think that I do think it's debatable. I think that's one of the hypotheses that should be tested with second chance Pell. How many of the second chance Pell recipients are greedy and maybe not functioning in a completely ethical manner? And
there's
how many
no
of us
ethics standards tied to the distribution of Pell inside or outside of
prison. Anywhere.
So, and we already have this information, really. I mean, I'm looking to Heather because we already know how many people apply and are denied. Every program site has this information. Now, whether or not it's going to be made public is a completely other question. But I think the thing I just want to throw out there is that Pell came available in the 1965 Higher Ed Act, right? So incarcerated college students were not kind of barred from that in any way until an unrelated act in 1994, okay? So most of us are familiar with that. Part of the challenge now in kind of talking about reinstating Pell is that most bipartisan that I am aware of, most bipartisan discussions of reinstating Pell is not a clean reinstatement. There are going to be restrictions for people related to crime of conviction, related to sentence. Some conversations are related to the housing unit, the facility that they're in. And so, I mean, I think, Jody, back to your comment about, I don't think Pell is going to save, it's certainly not going to address the quality issue in higher ed and prison. It's also not going to save or allow for the kind of expansion that I think we need. I think it can be beneficial, and I think it's ultimately going to help, but it's not going to fill the gap of what you're talking about. One of the things, and I'll just speak from the perspective of Utah, right now does not have a state-based need grant. I don't know if Wyoming does. Iowa doesn't either. Illinois did before they decided not to pass a budget for 3 years. But a lot of these are called promise programs, if you've heard of some of them. And in Utah, what we're really pushing for right now is not to exclude incarcerated students. Right, so this is state funding based on need. We know that incarcerated people meet the criteria, right? So this would be one other kind of funding mechanism for us to think about. And I think it's really important for us to keep imagining the problems with Pell. If we look at just kind of folks who are eligible outside of prison, there are myriad problems with Pell, right? And this, we have long documented this, right? And so the kind of confusion inside the prison is a result of all sorts of things, but it's not new to Pell. Like, there's been problems in the implementation of Pell for quite some time. And so I think I don't know if I have a great answer to your question, Jody, but I think my comment on that would be, if Pell becomes available tomorrow, I think we will see some subpar practices. I think some of them will be legitimate. Some of them might not be, intended. It might just be lack of knowledge. I do think we're going to continue to see some predatory practices that we already see now. And I don't think, if we think about how many semesters are people Pell eligible for? Semesters.
6 years, 12 semesters.
Right, and so at this point in time, right, like Pell does not match tuition to get you to a bachelor's degree. And so one of the other questions we really need to be asking is, if I exhaust my Pell as an incarcerated person, and now I'm out and I want to complete, and I have what else is available to me if I've defaulted on my loans, right? Like you're talking about your students. And so, I think one of the other additional responsibilities we have, if we're going to think about Pell, is what are students getting in terms of completion if they're going to use those Pell funds? Right, so that we're not just simply burning them, and I'm not saying we are, but those are things to think about if we're thinking about completion pathways. And then as well, there are lots of forms of federal financial aid. This is one of them. So how else can we think about what's available? Or what should be made available? Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm from CSU, so you're talking about replicating like higher education in prisons, and in prisons disproportionately there's more people of color, specifically Black and brown bodies, and higher education has historically been discriminatory against marginalized populations, and the way that you're talking about it, like you dabbled in like those that are underrepresented, but like, right, it's like people of color, marginalized identities, and so how are you going to ensure that this same system of like getting into college that has been historically discriminative, or like standardized testing that has been historically discriminatory? And so how are you going to replicate that onto a system, like a problematic system, onto another system? Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. I just want to give a little plug for the report that Jody mentioned yesterday too, this equity, am I allowed to even say the title? The Equity and Excellence report that's coming out. If you're committed to equity, anybody who works at a PWI, right, a predominantly white institution, if you've ever been on an admissions committee, you have to be very proactive if you're committed to equity. And equity in terms of race, ethnicity, ability, gender, sexuality, geography, right, and there's lots of ways that we can think about this. But absolutely, the same has to apply inside. And oftentimes, if you're just relying, which is why one of the questions we ask is, are there additional criteria in terms of admission that departments of corrections require? It is not uncommon to hear that, you walk into an info session and you're in a prison with the majority Black population and all white students show up. So that is telling of either a couple things. One, there are no Black people in the prison who are interested in higher education. Not the case. Or there are some other barriers that are preventing certain people from being able to access your program. And I think part of what's coming out in this report is going to be some really wonderful questions and some toolkits for practitioners to be asking related to racial equity and racial justice. I can speak, our co-director somewhere, I think she's holding my baby right now. I know at the University of Utah, one of the ways that we've really kind of embodied, the University of Utah, this might surprise you, has a racial justice statement like available on our website. And so one of the things that we've done is we've just kind of designed our admissions process in ways and kind of compiled our reviewer committee where equity is a central component of everything we do. It's not just the mission of our program. It's who gets in, it's what we talk about, it's who we read, it's what we kind of decide to value. But I think when it comes to kind of looking at the historical kind of presence of institutions of higher education, you have to radically work against the current in order to do this work. You said you were at CSU? Yeah. So it's going to require some change in behavior and some change in kind of thinking about what it means when we say things like merit. What does merit mean? Well, merit is actually just a reflection of white middle class values. And so if we're not going to go on PAID scores and GPA and ACT scores, then what are we going to go on? What do we want to have? And those, I think, are the conversations that programs will have to have if they want to actually kind of embody a commitment to equity that's not just simply on paper.
I would just like to say that we use absolutely no standardized testing, none. We only ask that the student either have some HSE. In the state of Indiana, it's now TASC, it used to be GED. We don't even care what that score is, just that you have a GED. And that they have 3 years so that they can earn an associate's degree with us. So we don't ask for tape scores. We don't ask for any scores. I don't even ask for the GED score. I just want to know that they have a high school diploma or equivalency and that they are eligible to take college classes. They write an essay. Yeah. And so we do, yes, so we have to have some way because we can't, honestly, we don't have the resources for open enrollment. And we have to have some way to determine, who's college ready, and that's what we use, is a written essay. We have had several students who've applied 2 or 3 times, who kind of had to take some feedback and go back and do a little more reading and practice writing and then come. The state of Indiana is kind of an equal opportunity incarcerator, for lack of a better phrase. Although the African American population is lower in the state than the prison population, so they have some room for improvement. Approximately half of incarcerated persons are of European American descent, and half are of African American descent. We have a very, very low Latinx, about less than 10% of the prison population in Indiana is Latinx, and we also, that's true of our student body. And so early on, when we saw that we had about 60% white and about 40% black, we knew that we needed to just take measures to remediate that. And so that's one of the reasons why we started running admissions at another facility, because there were more African Americans at the second facility than there were at Westville. And that really helped us balance our, our racial equity.
Okay, folks, am I right that we don't have any more questions? Great, let's go ahead and we'll take a break for 5 minutes and then we'll reconvene with Simon Alexander's session.